What is up, friends, YouTube, and motorcycle enthusiasts? Doing a radio install on the Motovan. Stick around. Alright, guys. The long awaited. I have been waiting so long to get everything together to install the aftermarket stereo in my 2018 Chevy Express Motovan. So in the van currently I have the bone stock stereo. It's got an audio 3.5 millimeter. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But the upgrade will be sweet. So what we have here, I chose a Boss BE10 ACP. So it's a 10-inch full-size screen with Android Auto and all those features, right? So from there, I have the GM install kit. And then I also, which because GM's and frankly most newer vehicles use the CAN bus integration system. GM uses a body control module. I had to get the Pack Audio RP5 GM3, I think it is. Either way, I'll put all the part numbers and stuff that I use down in the description. So in any case, also I added the Pack Audio USB plug here. So what I'm going to end up doing is putting that on the dash where I can plug in my phone and charge it, as well as run Android Auto and all that. I wanted to have a clean install, so one of the blanks, as you guys know, that sit there on the Motovan dash. And then from there, these little guys are actually pretty convenient, so I got a pack of those. And then I figured I might as well get some pin tools, basically, or tools for pulling apart interior pieces and panels. Those are really helpful. Standard screwdrivers that are steel can pop the clips. They don't give as much and stuff like that. They don't have as wide as spread on the interior panels. Mine's an 18. It's not as old, so I'm not as worried. But still, I don't want to accidentally crack any panels. So all of this was purchased from Crutchfield. I know a lot of people. I actually, just from a perspective of price, I actually added. I built all this cart out in Amazon, and then I built this cart out in Crutchfield, and it was $30 more from Crutchfield. And with that $30, I got two things for my money. Number one, Crutchfield's master install sheet, which shows me how to pull everything out, the trim and stuff out to actually do the install, which in a lot of vehicles is really not that big of a deal. But in the Chevy Express, that whole front trim panel has to come off. You guys will see it. So, you know, just having a sheet that walks me through pulling off exactly what bolts and where definitely streamlines that process. And the second thing I get is Crutchfield does a 5-year warranty on this stereo and that pack installation kit. So, I mean, let's be real, guys. $30 is worth it in my opinion. I know, I mean, I use Amazon a fair amount, and you know, it is what it is, but I wanted to support Crutchfield on this one. $30 difference, in my opinion. The customer support, if you guys have ever dealt with Crutchfield before, it's great. It really is. And they don't sponsor me or anything. I'm just saying, right? So this is what we're doing. Just 2 cents real quick. Why did I choose the Boss BE10 ACP? Great reviews, great price, and it's a large screen that I can adjust. And you guys will see that once I get it all installed. Those are really the big things. This is the top of the line. Not even close, guys. This thing's about $300 and some odd dollars. So I can't remember exactly. But it's not the top of the line, but it does get good reviews overall. And with that 5-year warranty, if there is anything that pops up, I think we're going to be in a good spot. So let's get into the install and start rocking and rolling. All right, my friends, I have now spent some bench time wiring everything up and getting ready for the installation itself. So what I want to do is take some time to go through and give you guys some notes. This will probably be a longer video, but it's okay. I want to add the detail. And for people that are watching this, obviously the detail is what matters. So first of all, the Pack RP5 GM31. This is the module, as I kind of showed you guys the box stuff, and these are the harnesses that are wired into the aftermarket stereo harness here. This is pretty straightforward. Pack does give you a QR code that you scan, which will then allow you to download the PDF. I chose to print the documents out. I highly recommend that as well. Just that way you can make notes, make references, highlight things as you're doing the install, because there is a good bit to this. Now for me, I personally don't have a lot of features because I have a base model van. My van is a LT, I think it is, maybe LS. Either way, it's a very basic stereo. It's non-amplified. I don't have navigation or extra screens or anything like that for inputs to feed the pack. So to start off, first and foremost, I want to make sure that if you guys have done any searches, you probably have heard that PAC did have a service bulletin that made it to where essentially when the aftermarket stereos were feeding inputs to the speakers, it was overloading the unit. And so essentially their service bulletin has them to take some of the wires for the speakers on this side and some coming from the aftermarket and go around the unit. Now, whenever you click on the QR code, my instructions did not have that. And the reason why is because it's relevant specifically to the model number that I have right here, which is right here on this little serial number. It says, I think it's 5471. So what they've essentially done is they've revised their unit. Now, obviously, whenever I just Googled the PAC instructions, or I even looked at Crutchfield's documentation for this unit, Crutchfield had the old instructions, which had you bypassing. I don't need to do that because this is the updated version. Now, we'll see in testing, but I want to make that clear. Use their QR code, find the instructions based on the version that's printed on the back of the box, and then go from there. So the other revisions or the other versions of this box have to where you have to wire around the box. And because these wires are a little short, you would use an extension, and it's just more time, right? So some other wires that came with the PAC connector kit that I'm not using is this guy right here. Obviously, I don't have a factory DVD display for the rear, so I'm not feeding those outputs from the factory. Now, it did come with an FM AM antenna kit, which is great. That was inside the box as well. But everything else is pretty straightforward. All I did was, per the instructions, I came through and followed this wiring diagram. Now, if you look at the steps, the first thing they're going to have you do is essentially to wire to set the dip switches. So the dip switches are on the unit here, and it's in the instructions. It's super straightforward. What they're having you do is set the dip switches in accordance to the brand of stereo that you have. And the reason why is this is specifically for the orientation of the outputs and inputs for that particular brand. And it really has to do because the speakers are all standard. You know, your purple, your grays, your white, your green. That's an industry standard. That's not going to change. What will change is how your steering wheel controls operate. And that's what they're getting at with these dip switches. These dip switches control what the input will be for the individual aftermarket stereo for this connection right here, which a lot of aftermarket stereos, if it's a decent stereo, it should have this. It's almost like a 3.5 millimeter audio connection, and I've taped it up to secure it, but it essentially comes from the PAC, converting the digital signal to an analog signal that feeds the aftermarket stereo. That analog signal has a voltage or resistance rotation for each independent button for your steering wheel controls. So, you know, if you want to skip the track, it'll give it 0.18 volts or whatever the case may be. So those dip switches matter. Now, one thing about this, I'm installing a Boss because, you know, I bought a cheaper radio. It's not a JVC, Kenwood, Stinger, Clarion, Pioneer, Sony, or Fusion. So it kind of falls in the all other brands, and that's what I'm going to go with initially. However, whenever I start testing stuff, what I can do is whenever my stereo controls on my steering wheel, if they're not correct, I can start testing with the other aftermarket dip switches, power off, change the dip switches, power them back on, and do some basic testing. So with that in mind, I can also completely reprogram independently each button of the stereo wheel controls for the pack, and it does have an aftermarket option that I can go through and do all that. Now I will say for you guys that if you get a really cheaper radio, you have these two wires right here. If your radio doesn't have this 3.5 millimeter input on the aftermarket stereo side, then you're going to have to use those wires to feed a wire that it would have. But obviously mine has this, so it should adapt with the pack perfectly, and I should be able to program everything. One last note is that there are a few loops built in to this pack stereo. The brown loop, and that's essentially if you're powering an aftermarket amp with the loop intact, so to speak. And this loop is, I think, right here. It's on here either way. With that loop intact, I'm sorry, the loop is right there. Yeah, it's on this side. So with that loop intact, you're essentially going to mute the remote output whenever OnStar is activated. Now OnStars are, it's a GM specific thing, but if you were, let's just say you hit the OnStar button, it will turn off your amplifier that maybe is running your subs or something like that. Now that's the way it is from default. If you don't want to do that, you just cut that wire, and then that is removed. And then the actual last thing is the chime. So this is the chime that is in place, and I don't know if I'm going to need this yet. Per the instructions, it basically says when you remove your stereo, your factory stereo, if you get a chime, you don't need this. So that's great. If you do need this, or if there is no chime, then I'm going to have to add the external chime module, and then I'll do that. So everything is pretty wired up, pretty well wired up. Again, I use these twist locks. These things are amazing. They're a little pricey, but they're just super handy. I don't really, they don't pull out like crimpers or your standard Canon crimpers that you would use. They're a little bit better quality, so I like that. Everything else seems to be in good order. For my particular install, I'm not going to be using front and rear power from the stereo for a front and rear camera. So I have chose to keep the OEM factory rear view camera or rear camera in my rear view mirror. So one thing about that is later, if I ever wanted to output that from the rear view camera down to the aftermarket stereo, then there is a plug that I can buy for that. It essentially just splits the digital signal, and then I ultimately feed that into the stereo itself, which is this guy right here, this video input right here, right? I take that back. It's actually on the back of the stereo itself. So these video inputs, front and rear, if I so wanted to. I chose not to. Honestly, a lot of the aftermarket cameras, they're shit, right? The ones that you get on Amazon for 20 bucks, or the one that comes with this Boss that they have a package deal that I chose not to get. They're just not very good, guys. To get an OEM quality or a decent quality camera, you're going to have to spend about 80 to 100 bucks a piece. And honestly, my OEM rear camera is fine. I don't need another one. I don't really need one on the front because my Express is so short in the front, and I have great visibility. So if I wanted to split the OEM signal, like I said, I would do that later. I just chose not to for now. I'm not going to delete my rear view. I'm going to keep it in place and just use the rear view camera, which is fine. I can see it easily. So, all right, that wraps up the wiring install. Now I have to shift gears to switch over to what Crutchfield sent me, which is the master install sheet for removing the dash portion of the Express itself, and that's what we're going to do. All right, my friends, we are in the steed of Motovan Awesome Adventures, and we're getting ready to install the aftermarket stereo that we just wired up inside the garage. So obviously, like I said before, we have the comprehensive instructions from Crutchfield. What I'm going to do for you guys is I'm actually going to stick this on a Google Drive and open it up to everyone so you guys can download this. I was just going to do it page by page, but it's a little too comprehensive and the instructions are a little bit better, but I'll run through it real quick. So the first thing you have to do is remove the two kick panels. There's a driver's kick panel that's right here and a passenger kick panel that's right here. Now this kick panel is nothing more than a plastic panel that goes over this, which allows you to remove the trim. So that's two 10mm bolts, and then from there you just pull the panel out, which you can see these slots, it locks to the plastic bezel with a pin. The same on this side, there's two 10mm bolts, and then you just pry the bezel off. One thing I will note is whenever I ordered my kit through Crutchfield, I also ordered these interior trim pry bars. These are 100% invaluable, guys. Between this and a small pick tool to get like some of the smaller stuff out of the bezel, it'll keep from injuring your bezel, and it'll overall be an easier job. So once you get those two panels off, then there is a foam piece that's under here that is also 4 10mm bolts, and then that foam piece is removed. And the reason why we're removing that foam piece is that so we can access the steering column. There's two 15mm bolts in the steering column that ultimately allow us to do this. The column is loose, it's hanging. We adjust the steering wheel tilt all the way down, and that allows this upper bezel to be lifted and up out. Now some of you may be thinking, well, why don't you just remove the steering wheel? It's because of this bezel up here locks into that seam. So though removing the wheel would work to get things out of the way, we also have the shifter. And not to mention, once we do the aftermarket install, I want to test and program my steering wheel controls on this side. And obviously this is cruise, which is should just work out of the box with the OEM. So once all that is removed, then you're basically going to go through and start pulling the panel all the way around. Now these are pretty stout clips, guys, and actually on this side I think you can see right here that the plastic actually separated. On this side it was good to go, so I had one of the two on this side. I highly recommend, again, using this tool. And what I did on this side, which I should have done on that side, is work the tool in there and pry it out. If you just start pulling on the panel, it's going to start flexing in the middle. What you need to do is feel around where the actual posts are that lock the bezel to the dash, and then pry or push on that particular location. Another thing I did to get the top piece off, because this is extremely flexible, I slid this in and then pulled, which that way I'm pulling straight back and I'm not prying on the bezel itself. So those pieces were invaluable. As for this stuff down here, these are my accessories. Again, we have basic stuff because this is a base model. We have a power inverter, 150 watt. We have the traction control button off, the airbag, and then the OnStar. And then I have a couple blanks in place as well. From what I can see, the wiring is pretty robust in the rear. I should be able to move some of this stuff around, which is what I plan on doing. Because I am adding the USB port for the aftermarket stereo once it gets in, I will install that right here. And then I also have a blank for if I want to do light switches or something like that. Any other accessory, I will have those blanks so that I'll be able to do that. And I can move things around depending on what I want to do. Now, one thing with this, guys, you do have to take all of the plugs off of this. The instructions do say to feed the passenger light through. Do not, quote, unplug it. And probably the reason why is because it will throw a code when you turn the key on. This does not fit back through. It was setting right here. You're just going to end up scratching the face of this. If you're trying to get it back through, it's okay. Unplug it. If you do get a code thrown, you can plug it back in, disconnect the negative battery power, and it'll clear it. At least that's my assumption. So we shall see, right? And then this little guy, which is my trailer transmission control. It's not a brake controller. It's just to let the transmission know that I'm towing. This just fell right out whenever I removed this small ring. So this whole bezel here, now that my 12 volt plugs are also just disconnected from the back, which was super easy. So this right here is all ready to come out and then start removing the factory stereo. So we're at this point to where we can get this thing off. Per the instructions, as it says, you got to be very mindful of this piece right here, and you've got to kind of just snake it up and around your shifter. Now at the end of the day, I could just turn the key on and then move the shifter down, but either way, I think this is really just, I'm going to have to take my time to get around that. So we'll come back whenever we get the stereo installed. All right, my friends, I have power. So I have the Boss 10-inch screen and stereo set up. If you guys haven't seen these before, this is basically the setup. I'll go over it once I get everything installed in the dash. Obviously, I'm in the testing phase. So I did end up needing the chime connector, so there was no chime. No big deal. There is 4 settings on this little guy. It's on the side. It was super freaking loud when I first turned it on. You can adjust it down to, I put it to volume 1 and I'll stick it up in there and it'll be good to go. So a couple notes about the stereo setup. First of all, I really like it. It's super smooth. I'll wrap up an actual use of the stereo and what I think of the stereo at the end. What I want to talk about here is a few things that I had to do. All of my wiring worked perfectly. So I plugged in the harness for the GM side, the pack modules chilling out here in the middle, and then I just plugged it into the stereo itself. Now again, because I'm not using the rear, any kind of rear camera, I'm just going to use the rear camera that sits inside of my rear view mirror. Then I just turned those settings off within here. Android Auto works great, which is one of the USB outlets. And then the other USB outlet is for stored media. So if I want to have a USB drive, play movies, listen to MP3, MP4s, that type of stuff. So I haven't done any extensive testing with that yet. I started to, but I formatted a thumb drive. I threw a movie on there, formatted a thumb drive, and I made it. I think it needs to be FAT32, so the thumb drive would see the whole 30 gig. So I didn't put it on FAT32, I put it on FAT-EX, and the head unit didn't recognize it. So I'll redo that process. Got a little Maverick on there. I want to see Maverick on the screen, but I'll deal with that later. So what I did end up doing, though, however, is programming my steering wheel controls. Now, per the instructions of the pack system, when you set the stereo, there is a default setup, and the default setup it'll either work or it won't. Now every stereo is different. I set mine to other, remember, with the dip switches that I had to set, and then most of the functions worked, but what didn't work is I had no mute button. And I really like having the ability to just mute my stereo off of the steering wheel. So what I did was I went through the aftermarket configuration of the pack module. The instructions are very straightforward. You just tap this program button twice for aftermarket. Then they give you a specific list that goes down the line of what button you want to be volume up, volume down, track forward, track back, and every single option that you have at your disposal, and mute is one of those options. Now, the good thing about aftermarket is number one, it eliminates the OnStar. So this is an if I press and hold this call button, OnStar will come on. I don't have OnStar in this van. It's not activated, nor do I plan to activate it. It's just a part of GM stuff. Not to mention, even if I did, my dash has OnStar buttons right here. So these guys are chilling out because I removed the bezel. So if I wanted to use the OnStar, then I could literally just use the dash button. I'm not using OnStar that much anyway. So the aftermarket configuration allows me to change those OnStar programming buttons to whatever I want. Per the list, mute was one of those. So I got to be able to mute it on and off, and you can see when I just tap that call button, the mute comes on and off on the stereo. And then obviously volume up, volume down. I can change the source, you name it. Everything seems to be working exactly as I wanted. I will say I am obviously using my phone here in my hand to record the video. I didn't have my GoPro out, so the phone my S22 does great. I am connected to Android Auto. I had to go through a couple cables. I think either the cables that I'm using were just on their way out, or either the stereo or the phone itself may be a little bit more finicky to the plug, but I have a brand new cable here working great. Again, Android Auto working awesome. I did find one feature apparently with Spotify, is that the Spotify app is within the Android Auto selection, but the app doesn't work. So apparently Spotify stopped supporting some Pioneer head units, and I think Boss has Pioneer firmware or Pioneer underpinning. So in any case, I can still listen to Spotify. I just have to turn it on and off with my actual phone. The app doesn't work, which is kind of a bummer, but it's not a deal breaker. It's not something that I'm just going to return the head unit for. Spotify's fine. VLC seems to work fine as well. So it doesn't really look like there's anything beyond that isn't working correctly. Now, again, I do have some of these power plugs hanging out. I'm going to wrap up this install, find a nice tucked little spot to double-sided tape the pack module, and then start with getting the actual head unit installed into the dash and all the wiring cleaned up. And not to mention, I want to put my USB adapter in one of the blanks and move some of those blanks around. So I'm going to work through that configuration. But as of right now, the pack module is doing a great job. It listens to everything I do. Whenever I turn it up, you see it responding. I can mute. I have volume controls, source controls, and all that jazz. So I'm extremely happy with the installation, and I'm especially happy I didn't have to reprogram the body control module, as some people have said previously, whenever I added this crisp, amazing steering wheel. So I'm going to get everything installed, and then we'll wrap up the video. Alright guys, I once again want to take the time to put out some details here. So I'm putting everything back together. I tested everything works. I ended up double-sided tape and putting the pack module down the bottom, cleaning all the wiring up, keeping everything together as a bundle. I ran my mic to the top, which is this wire right here, which goes into the aftermarket stereo. Everything is good to go. So once I got everything mounted up, the dash kit, I got it installed. So we essentially have two options. Those options are to do an ISO DIN, which is what you see here, which basically means just the stereo, or you can do the regular DIN install, which means you use the cage. Now there's a couple different options here, obviously, between that. What I found is with the cage, I couldn't get everything to lock into the plastic surround, which ultimately bolts up here. I couldn't get it to be secure, so I ended up using the install kit radio mounts, and then those have teeth. It's like a clamp on the front side of that, and that just essentially just snaps in to the surround itself, and you can see it's in place right here. It actually looks really clean. And then I even have the extra OEM ring, as well as a ring, a bezel ring that was supplied with the kit. I'm going to use the OEM after I test fitted it. Now, what I am running into is, because I got this sweet hotness over here, a relatively large 10-inch screen that hangs on the front of it, it does put a lot of pressure in the stereo. Now, another thing is, if you guys are doing Motovans, you guys know these vans don't ride really great. This is a 3500 chassis. It's a 1-ton vehicle. So obviously when you're hitting joints in the road and bumps and things like that, a lot of the interior takes a lot of shock, because you know this thing is designed to tow and haul, right? So with that, you really want the stereo to be solid inside the pocket. So what I was having happening, everything was good, I could adjust it and move it around, but the weight of the screen with just some movement overall was overpowering the plastic clip here. And I gotta say, I don't like it. I don't like that I can just tilt the stereo and move it in place. So what I've opted to do, this actually came with my stereo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on top of the the plastic brackets there to lock everything in. Now what I had to do was machine out a circle. I just used my drill press, super easy, so it would clearance these pilot teeth. There's one on both sides essentially, because they go into the dash. So because of that, so once I lock that in, then it will be completely locked in from the backside, and it won't be able to pry out or separate from the surround install dash kit itself. I did it to both of the brackets, one on each side. So again, this is definitely taken more time, and this is a comprehensive install. But taking the time to do this type of stuff is what's going to be nice for a long time. I do not want to have to take this entire front bezel off again, so I want to do it right. So I'm going to get those mounts in, get this thing mounted back up, and try to get it assembled. Moving forward. Alright guys, the installation is completely wrapped up. So what are my thoughts on this thing? This thing is pretty awesome. I am really happy with the placement. The install was extremely involved, as I mentioned before. This is by far the most comprehensive install I've ever done on a vehicle, and I've installed a lot of stereos, guys. I don't really typically own newer vehicles, so I'm usually putting aftermarket stereos in older vehicles. So in any case, as you guys saw, the bezel must come off. So that's pretty much the tail of the tape with this whole install. The wheel upgrade, could not be happier with the wheel upgrade. It feels so much better in my hand. I have steering wheel controls here that I got to program. It works perfectly. The head unit itself, I've adjusted it a little bit, but as you guys can tell, you can tilt it, you can slide it, you can move it around, and pretty much have it do whatever you really want to. I hang my phone right here, and then I also added this pack USB port, which interfaces with the rear of the in with the head unit on the back side. So that was a nice little addition. In retrospect, I probably would have got two of them. So I think I'm going to add some USB charging over on this side, just for, just to get it done. So what would I have done different? There's only two things that I would have done different. Number one, I probably would have tried to integrate the factory speaker from the OnStar. So I do have a speaker that sits up here. It's a part of the OnStar system that's in this thing. I say speaker, microphone. I would have tried to integrate that. So, because as I speak, it's a head level where I'm at. So the stereo unit did come with this microphone. I did a test call. It works really well. It's just visually, it's okay. There's a little foamy guy sitting there. Could I have ran it up and around and put it somewhere? Yeah, maybe so. But at the end of the day, on the column is where I chose to put it. This is not a luxury vehicle, it's a Motovan, so it's not that big of a deal. So the second thing is, whenever I was wiring this thing up, I actually wired the brake light, or the brake input, the emergency brake input, to AC power instead of ground on accident. I don't know why I got them mixed up, but I did. In turn, I can't watch movies, so videos will not work. The USB will play. I have the Labyrinth on here, and it absolutely will play. And there is sound, but yeah, I'm messing up here. I'm going all over the place. In any case, this is what I get, right? The safety reasoning, the video cannot be played because it always thinks that I'm driving, as opposed to it always thinking I'm parked, or even actually doing what I should have done, and that would be just to wire it normally to the pack audio. Let me mute that for you. The pack audio output, which would have came from the body control module and given me the no kidding actual emergency brake active whenever it's active and not when it's not. So I tried to be cool. So what I ultimately wanted to do was, it's not like I'm going to be driving around watching movies, but if the passenger wants to watch a movie while I'm driving, my wife or someone or my co-pilot, then I can just tilt the screen to them. They can be, I can run my phone right here and run Google Maps right there. They can watch a movie or whatever, and I can listen. Yeah, that would be a nicety. It would be a nicety. So for me to fix that, I need to take off the entire front console again. I may do it. We'll see. It's one of the features that would kind of be cool to have. But at the end of the day, I mostly listen to podcasts, music, and that's, Google Maps and navigation is really why I wanted this install. I was tired of playing with my phone and trying to do everything. It's extremely distracting. That's why I like the steering wheel controls completely, so I can keep my eye on the road. And and I have navigation and a nice big 10-inch screen. I couldn't be more happy with it. And it is adjusted all the way down on the back side, so you guys can see it's slid all the way down, which leaves just enough room. It's perfect. I was a little concerned with this Metra installation kit because we're not able to switch the pocket on the top side and put the radio down, so I'm glad there was enough adjustability. I don't want the screen obviously to be too low, because if I have any cups or anything in there, it will interfere, and I don't want it to be too high if I want to adjust my controls. However, I can slide this thing up and down pretty easily. It moves, doesn't take too much to move it around, so it's kind of cool. I think even right there is probably a good spot. But in any case, I'm extremely happy with the Boss 10-inch head unit. The wheel upgrade, everything turned out really, really good. I know this is a longer video, and I'll just keep talking about everything because that's kind of what I do. So I'll wrap it up here. I hope you guys enjoyed it and got something out of it. And yeah, hope you guys are enjoying the Motovan build. More good stuff coming. I got more parts in the garage just sitting there now that I have some time and a little bit of funds to get after some of the things I've been wanting to do to finish the Motovan. All right, guys. Hope you get out there, get on two wheels, ride a dirt bike. This is Accelerate once again. Signing off.